for 2013 webinar hosted by Nscaled. My name is Mario Oliveras. I am Vice President of Product Management here at Nscaled. There's my contact information. I could be reached at mario@nscaled.com. There is my phone number. If you have any questions after the webinar, please send me an email, call me, not a problem. Today, I'm talking about a few different things. I'm going to be starting off defining IT disaster recovery, just so we can do some level setting and we can talk apples to apples and have the same definition. Second, I'll move into disaster recovery approaches. At a high level, there's really two ways to do disaster recovery. One is do it yourself, also known as DIY. The second is using a service provider, consuming it as a service. And then I'll end the webinar with a budgeting exercise. So we'll be doing budgeting for IT disaster recovery, and in particular, we'll look at cost, requirements, functionality, and we'll do a TCO and compare do-it-yourself with service providers, and then we'll end with questions. So let's start off with defining IT disaster recovery. What does that mean? I'm not sure if you've ever seen or if you're familiar with the SHARE scale, but this is a great scale for not only understanding where your organization falls today in terms of disaster recovery, but more importantly, where it should be. And this is a very handy scale to use for the budgeting exercise. And so what I want to do is, this is very technical in nature with a lot of jargon. I want to talk about a couple of these things and relate them to products and services, whether that's software, technology, or hardware that you see today on the market. So Tier 0, no offsite data, possibly no recovery. What does that mean? This means that the business may do some type of backup, but does not do anything offsite. Tier 1 means, again, doing traditional on-premise backup software, doing traditional on-premise disaster recovery, either you're using backup software or tapes, but again, no hot site capabilities. Tier 2, very similar to Tier 1, but includes the second location. Tier 3, electronic vaulting. Really what that means in terms of what we're seeing today on the market, it's generally online backup with long-term storage or archiving. Tier 4, point-in-time copies, SAN snapshots. This is block-level replication, whether you're doing that on-premise or in a remote data center or to a remote data center. Tier 5, transaction integrity, application-aware snapshots. Really kind of what that means from our perspective is quiescent snapshots that can be booted from that are application aware. And then we have Tier 6, which is near zero, RPO, RTO, and in terms of technology, what we're really talking about there, at least at a high level, is continuous data protection, also known as CDP. And then lastly, Tier 7, which most businesses, this is kind of on the high end of the scale of a highly automated business integrated solution. And in this case, we're talking about automated runbooks and testing. And so the SHARE scale is just a great way to determine, as a business, where are you at today and where do you want to be tomorrow. And everything that I talk about in the webinar today is really meant to get a business from these lower TG. This slide is more about the user. So you have the technical implementation, but then you kind of have the day-to-day operations that go on with the business. What do the people within an IT organization who are responsible for disaster recovery, what do they want? What's that human face? What are those real needs that come up daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly? And so what we see a lot is, you have the IT team who wants to easily and quickly recover files for their end users. Maybe that's a lost email with a PDF attachment, for example. Maybe they want to be prepared for a power outage that might take down a critical business system, such as an Exchange server. They want to be able to quickly recover servers in event of a downtime, maybe due to a bad drive. They want to ensure that their Exchange server does not go offline during the work week. Maybe they want to save the business money and use newer technology such as public cloud, but they want to ensure that that data is confidential and not at risk. So in terms of disaster recovery, this is sort of the definition we're talking about. How can we enable these end users to meet all of their needs that they have, that they're challenged with every day? So defining ITDR, the status quo. What I'd like to do is maybe just open up the webinar to one or potentially two participants to sort of get an idea of where do you, as an attendee, where do you see your organization on the share scale? Are you on the lower end, meaning tier 0, 1, 2, or 3? Or have you, or are you in the middle, or have you implemented a highly scalable, automated solution? So maybe we can get an audience member to talk to us about what they see within their organization.
And everyone is muted right now, so if you have something to say, if you have an answer for the question, please go ahead and click on the little hand icon, and I will unmute you. Thanks. Okay. We'll give you a quick second.
Okay. If we don't have any.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide if we don't have any attendees that want to talk to us about where they see their organization. Let me tell you about...
Oh, you know what? Mario, sorry, we do have one now. Jay has a response. So Jay, I'm going to unmute you. Okay, Jay.
Hi. Can you hear me okay? Or?
Hear you great.
Yes.
Okay, hi. Yeah, I'm a small business, so I tend to, I classify my own data as tier 1. I do work with larger businesses, and I believe most of them would fit into the tier 2, where they're backing up data locally and then have an agreement with hosted data centers. Well, it seems like a lot of them are still trying to find their way. I know one particular client was doing recovery at one of their alternate locations, and then what they had were machines that basically they retired from production that they were using to as their failover, and I believe they've recently contracted then with a local data center.
Excellent. Jay, thank you for sharing that with us. And you know, Jay, that is something that actually we see as well as a service provider. Most of our clients who come to us really fit into that tier 1 through 3 category there. And you know, most of these clients are doing something locally. Very few are doing anything remotely. And they're coming to us really for a couple reasons. One is, you know, they want to lower their RTO or RPO goals because the current implementation is just not meeting those business needs. Or they're wanting to you know, maybe leverage newer technology to get more feature functionality out of a service. But I think what we see lines up with exactly with what you're seeing as well. Now, in terms of you know, the share model in sort of tier 7, as I said, this whole presentation is about how do we get a company from the lower tiers to tier 7, and more importantly, how do we budget for that, and how do we understand the total ownership, the TCO. And so let's just spend a couple of minutes talking about share tier 7. What is that? And you know, when you look at the marketplace and you look at what's going on with either technologies or what's going on with service providers, there is the trend of combining backup with disaster recovery. And by disaster recovery, I mean IT infrastructure failover and business continuity, and delivering that internally to an organization as a single service with high automation. And that's really what we talk about when we say complete IT business continuity. These 3 distinct services. You know, you have the local piece of that, and this is really about, I want to back up my files locally. I want to recover them quickly in the event that one of the attorneys in the office or an internal user has lost a file. I want to make sure that I can go out, get a backup, get the correct version, and get that back to that internal customer. And usually in minutes. Or I have my servers that I'm running within recover if a hard drive fails or one of the servers go down. So how can I continue operations at the server level in the event that something were to happen to the production system, all within my office or my data center. Then you have sort of online backup and recovery, and by that what I mean is the ability to take the data that you're backing up, whether that's a file or whether that's a server, so whether it's file or block, and replicate that or copy that to a second facility to give you an extra layer of protection. With the ability to go out and recover that file or that server in the event that something were to happen and bring that back to your office. And then lastly here, disaster recovery. Again, how do I fail over my infrastructure in the event that something bad were to happen? And how could I do that seamlessly, quickly, with high automation? And in particular, a lot of what we're seeing is the ability to fail over a server or a group of servers that are associated with an application within 15 minutes or less, or the ability to fail over an entire data center within 2 hours, and all through a highly automated workflow. And when we say complete IT business continuity and disaster recovery, what we're talking about is a fully integrated solution that provides file backup, long-term storage, and IT disaster recovery, meaning server failover. That really is what defines Share Tier 7 status. So now that we've talked, we've set the table in terms of where we see most businesses and kind of where most businesses want to go and the model that we're using to analyze that. Let's talk about the approaches. How can you get to Tier 7? And one way to do that is do it yourself. Go out and get the hardware and the software, build the capabilities to achieve Tier 7. And so what I've come up here is just an example scenario. Obviously, most businesses are very unique in their infrastructure, very unique in their applications depending on their industry. And so I've come up with a typical scenario that I see on a fairly regular basis. So if you look at the diagram there, on the left-hand side you have an office. This is your office. And within that office you run infrastructure. These are usually servers that run business applications, or for the most part, and you might have a virtual environment, meaning you have a host, you're using a hypervisor, and you're provisioning multiple servers to run multiple applications. And typical scenarios you'll see is VMware, Hyper-V, Zen server. Or you have a Windows server. Maybe you're running Exchange server or Microsoft SQL server or SharePoint. And then you'll have a Linux or a Unix server. And what you want to do to implement disaster recovery is you can implement file level backup. So you go out and buy hardware, you get software, and that becomes your local backup, which gets you one step towards Share Tier 7. A second method is to do block level replication or block level backup. This is particularly helpful for virtual environments where you replicate systems at the block level to a target within your facility to achieve first continuity locally, but also eventually to get you off-site in the event that something bad were to happen or you experience downtime. And lastly, to do archiving, long-term storage, you can go out and contract through a company like Iron Mountain, which will take your tapes and store them off-site. The second piece of this is the remote site or the second data center, where you would need to go up and set up more infrastructure, and you would need to set up not only the hardware to set up your own compute environment, but also the storage, which will allow you to not only copy and replicate data from one location to the other, but more importantly, to recover the data or to perform IT disaster recovery. So this is a very typical approach for achieving Share 7 status in the do-it-yourself approach. Now, what are sort of some of the attributes of the DIY approach? You deal with, as a business, you're going to deal with multiple vendors, Iron Mountain for the vaulting, your co-location provider. You need hardware to purchase. You need to go out to Dell or HP. You need software such as Commvault, Backup Exec. For the most part, these are all individual standalone components that you're purchasing. They really require the business to manually develop and integrate and maintain, which means you're going to need a very highly technical staff to manage the manual integration. And you really need to integrate these point solutions to achieve level 7. And to get those low RTOs and RPO goals really requires automation. And it's very labor intensive, particularly around the testing of this. And what we see as a result of this is that most businesses, because of the engineering effort, don't really achieve shared Tier 7. And when I say engineering effort, I don't mean necessarily going out and purchasing and plugging in the hardware, but it's really around the integration of the various individual components and making them one cohesive unit so your users within the IT department are actually consuming it as an internal service. Now, what's made this possible is the evolution of technology and what's going on in the marketplace within the last, I would say, 2 to 4 years. At the top there, what we see what's going on with vendors is you have your traditional software vendors who are really embracing and moving towards disaster recovery and enabling cloud infrastructures, whether that's private or public. And then you sort of have the newer breed of cloud infrastructure vendors who are working towards on-premise, mostly through the hybrid architecture approach. And as a result, we're really at a point where you have sort of the modern technologies and sort of the more traditional approaches. And what I mean by that is the more modern approach is sort of the integrated components, doing that integration so an IT department can consume all of the services in a very highly integrated service, versus the more traditional way, which is non-integrated components and just having these individual point solutions. So you have, in terms of modern attributes, high automation, a single vendor that you're dealing with. The service is scalable in terms of provisioning new infrastructure versus traditional where it's more of a manual implementation, not only from the provisioning but also from the usage. You're dealing with multiple vendors, and you're doing this yourself. And the enabling technologies that are transforming or evolving the marketplace, where we see backup and disaster recovery being delivered as a single service, are many. This is a small example that I have here, but these are really the driving technologies that are allowing businesses to be more efficient with how they implement disaster recovery plans. It's that idea of DR is really changing, and it's changing very fast, in fact. So now that we know sort of what's going on in the marketplace, let's talk about the service providers. What are your options to implement share Tier 7 disaster recovery by leveraging a service provider? And here's a typical example of what I see. You have your office, so that same infrastructure, your virtual infrastructure, your physical servers, your virtual servers, your Windows and Linux operating systems, and then your hypervisor. But instead of contracting out through multiple vendors to achieve multiple use cases, generally what you'll see with a service provider is that the service provider will deliver a local appliance. And that local appliance does a couple of things. First, it's a single point that allows you to recover files locally and very quickly. It allows you to recover servers and run servers locally. And it also generally acts as a gateway to remote infrastructure. And that remote infrastructure is generally the service provider's data center. And generally it's done through either a dedicated circuit or a VPN. And they provide the replication or copying software to get data from one location to the other. And usually what you'll see with a vendor within the vendor data center, they will provide all of the hardware. They will provide the compute platform, whether that's VMware-based or Xen-based. They'll provide the storage platform as well. And then what you see more and more with these service providers is they're using software-defined networking to make to really automate the networking capabilities around adding IPs, getting additional IPs, connecting servers back to your office. And all of that being managed through a single vendor interface, usually a web-based interface delivered through a single vendor for backup and disaster recovery, generally very scalable when it comes to the actually provisioning of the infrastructure. Generally, you see pay-as-you-go and high automation through that web-based interface, self-service, generally backed up by a 24/7 technical support department. So knowing, we've covered the shared model, which should give you an idea of where your organization fits. We've discussed the various approaches, do-it-yourself versus partnering with a service provider. We talked about, at a high level, what's going on in the marketplace, what's that benefit, what's the value add in terms of how could I combine backup and disaster recovery and deliver it as a highly automated service within the organization. Now I'm going to move in and talk about how much does this cost me? How can I budget for this? What's the investment and the return for my business? And so this next section, we'll discuss that. So generally with any IT project within a business, there's really one main objective, and that main objective is how do I get the highest value solution at the lowest cost? And in my example here, that's the main objective. How could I get more with less or at the same? So in this example, I'm using infrastructure for the Acme company, which is a fictitious company that I created, and they have the following infrastructure. They have an Exchange server, they have a Microsoft SQL server, they have a SharePoint server, and then they're running a VMware virtual infrastructure for a total of 20 virtual machines, and you can see the totals there. In this example, and in my budgeting exercise, the infrastructure that I'll use to drive the cost and do the TCO will be based on 23 servers, a mix of virtual and physical infrastructures, 56 cores, 120 gigs of RAM, and 10 terabytes of storage, with the ability to grow at a 15% rate year over year. Now, I've created the functionality. What's the functionality that's required to achieve Tier 7, and what are the requirements for my business, for the Acme company? And so let me go through these. So the first requirement, I need to be able to store my data off-site. I'm going to have my production systems in one location. I will have my data in a secondary facility. I want to be able to recover a server on-premise and in a remote data center. I want to be able to recover files within 2 minutes. I want to be able to recover servers within 15 minutes. And I want to be able to recover an entire data center within 2 hours. And I can't exceed 15-minute RPO, meaning that I can't lose more than 15 minutes of data in the event there was an event. I need an SLA of 5 nines. I need to be able to get support 24/7. I need to be able to do automated DR testing because the Acme company has a small IT department. I want to be able to minimize the time that the Acme IT department spends on managing capacity. I want instant scalability. Excuse me. I want to be able to set up alerting or monitoring and alerting for servers, for storage, for utilization, for network utilization. I want to be able to administer the entire solution hands-on through high automation, through an interface. I'd like to automate the runbook, so when I do have to fail over infrastructure, it's more seamless. I'd like the ability to automate the provisioning of servers and storage and networking. And the Acme company has some compliance requirements. They need the ability to take data, write it once into a storage target, give end users access to that data, and ensure that the data is not altered or deleted in any way. And then they have some internal security controls that they need to meet. In particular, they need role-based access control, so they need multiple users with different levels of access to the system. They need encryption for both data at rest and data in transit. And then they have some compliance that they need to meet. In particular, they need to achieve ISO 27001 and SSAE 16 compliance. And if possible, they would like to do this entire implementation in 1 month. Those are the requirements. That's the functionality to achieve share Tier 7 for the Acme company. Now, let's look at DIY, and I built out this budgeting template for DIY. Now, there's a lot of data here, and I'm not going to go through all of the line items here, but you can see what the monthly and annual cost is, and you can see that the majority of these costs are driven really by two things. One is the acquisition or the purchasing of hardware, software, and related software for automation. In terms of assumptions, as Vice President of Product Management at Nscale, one of the main things that I'm responsible for is understanding the market. What are all of the options out there to do disaster recovery? What are you want to do it or whether you want a service provider? And so what I did to drive these numbers is I used an average. In the DIY template, you can see that most of the charges from software, getting extra secondary data, need to infrastructure, not at the site, you needing routing, switching infrastructure. And I've also assumed that Acme Company can actually perform, they're up to speed to do the and let's do it with a service provider. Take that same functionality, take the same requirements for Acme, and let's see what those costs are. And you can see when you engage with the service provider, you have most of the fees being driven by primarily two items. One is storage, one is compute. One is how can I store my data, and then second is when I do need to fail over, I need the compute resources to actually continue business operations. And then you'll see that a lot of the other requirements around the automation, the single service, the single pane of glass, the high automation workflow is generally, with most service providers, all inclusive. And you can see that with the services template, the annual investment over a 3-year period is $212,000 for a monthly cost of $5,900 per month. And the same logic applies. All of these numbers are an average. I've gone out and I've collected pricing from all of the vendors who provide these types of services and averaged the price. So this is not going to be exact. You might get a little bit lower. You might get a little bit higher. It really depends on your business's specific needs and the service provider. So let's go ahead and look at a side-by-side comparison and look at that TCO. So in this case, you have services where, you're looking at least for the Acme company, $212,000 over investment over a 3-year period versus do-it-yourself, $284,000 and a savings of about 25%. What I want to stress here is that most businesses' infrastructures are complex and they're unique, and that really what you need to do is you need to use the budgeting template and do a TCO analysis to really determine your unique needs and the savings. It might turn out that the savings is less, which makes going to a service provider not as financially attractive. You might find that it goes from 20 to 50%, but really once you go through this exercise, the data will determine the right path for your business. So what I want to do now, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar. The first question, what I want to do is throw out another question to the audience, to the attendees, and maybe get some feedback and talk about the model and the TCO and answer any questions. But before I do that, what I do want to say is that if you, as an attendee, are in the process of planning for any type of disaster recovery or backup projects for 2013, and you would like help, you can. We'd be more than happy to provide consulting services free of charge. And you could use one of our IT business continuity analysts who can take the model to answer questions about the share model or just get some feedback. So we can either take those questions through chat, or if you want to raise your hand meeting, panel, either way. So Sarah, I'll go ahead and let you take over from here.
Great. Thank you very much, Mario. Okay, so do we have any questions? Go ahead and just the icon, and I will go ahead and unmute you, or you can go ahead and type those in. My first question is from David. David would like to know if the slides are available for download. And yes, I will send out the slides after the webinar.
Yeah, so what I'd like to say to that is we generally, as regular practice, we generally PDF these slides and send them out to all of the attendees, so you can expect that within the next couple of days. And more importantly, if you would like the templates that I've used, we would be more than happy to send those out as well. Where you know, the reality with these things is they're generally a very good starting point, but the reality is you probably want to modify them to your specific goals.
Okay, and then I've got some feedback from Jay. Jay, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Yeah, I just had a couple of observations. I noted that the infrastructure savings I thought was pretty obvious. That jumps out right away. My past experience, it seems like it's easy to kind of forget about the vendor management costs. So I saw that as another nice benefit of the model. And then the other thought I had was it seems that with this type of model, it allows businesses to focus on work group recovery. My past experience has been that we focus so much on data center recovery that that the work group recovery tends to take a back seat. So I like the model.
Yeah, you know, Jay, you bring up a good point here, and I think what's going on in the marketplace, and I think this all comes down to sort of the enabling technologies and the evolution and the rapid change that we see, particularly with cloud computing sort of impacting the traditional approaches, is that I think traditionally most businesses had a very fragmented approach to doing backup and disaster recovery, and they were generally thought of as two distinct things. And the backup being the more sort of the immediate pain point, with the disaster recovery being a, hey, that's, you know, on our to-do list, but it never kind of made it to the point of taking action. And where the technology is taking us, and where the service providers and the enabling technology providers are taking us, is combining disaster recovery with backup. A lot of times either cheaper or at the same cost for just that backup solution, and then getting all of the additional benefits of automation, you know, the work group recovery, as you mentioned. Regardless of whether you do that yourself or you work through a service provider, that's definitely the shift, and that's definitely the direction. And that's why I decided to have this webinar that, you know, if you are budgeting, this is the type of data you need to know to understand the marketplace, and really how can you get more with less or with the same.
Great. Thanks, Jay. We've got one more question, and that's from Peter, and he actually typed it in. Okay, so Peter says, through the course of your analysis, do you identify the value of the data so that the right solution and the application of the money is in alignment?
In this analysis, to keep it simple, I didn't take it to that level. I think what you're asking is, in terms of the analysis, businesses have different tiers of data, meaning, you know, tier 1 data, tier 2 data, archive data, and generally, and I think David is right on here, and what he's pointing out is that you generally have different infrastructures to host those different tiers of data, and generally the lower the tier, in this case, tier 1, requires more high-performance compute or high-performance infrastructure versus tier 3 or even tier 4 data, which is long-term archiving cheap. I didn't go into that analysis. Again, it's for the purposes of this webinar, I wanted to keep it high level, but what I try to emphasize is that my analysis was just an example. It's a high-level framework for looking at. What I would recommend for you to do, or for anyone to do, is to take the general template, customize it to the needs of your project or the stated goals, and if tiering the data and tiering those infrastructures and breaking that out, I would definitely do that. So thank you for that question.
And actually, Peter has a follow-up comment. So he was actually talking about the terms of our professional services which come on the site. So Peter, I can go ahead and unmute you if you would like. Let me go ahead and do that right now. Okay, Peter, you are unmuted.
That's not good.
Yeah, so we have echo.
Okay, let's try that one more time. Peter, can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, that's not working. Could you please unmute Peter? Peter, thank you for the question, first off. My phone number is on the screen, as well as my email address. If you could shoot me an email, I'd be more than happy to give you a call and discuss this in person. Sarah, maybe you could read the question to me one more time, and I'll see if I can answer it right now.
So Peter was talking about in terms of our professional services on the site.
So I can discuss generally, again, what goes on with professional services across all businesses. I try to be objective as possible in the analysis, and I really tried my hardest not to look at what Nscale does, but I looked at all of the service providers who are providing these types of services, and I studied the terms of service and the implementation. And generally, David, what you see is all of the service providers, including Nscale, define implementation the same, which is generally the on-premise piece, and then there's a professional services component of implementing the off portion or the remote site, and then doing all of the integration. And in terms of pricing, it's all over the board. What I found, kind of the high-level trends here, are the companies, the backup companies, the local backup companies, whether that's software or appliance space, generally are very strong locally in terms of capabilities, and they get weaker as they go out to the cloud, and hence, as a result, the professional services fees for implementation go up, and it's a little bit more complicated. And you can contrast that to the service providers who sort of started off in the cloud and then have worked towards the on-premise piece, and what you find is the implementations are much quicker because generally the remote data centers, those platforms, are much more scalable, much more flexible. They're more, they're API driven, and generally the professional services engagements are much quicker and much cheaper. I hope that answered your question. If it didn't, I apologize. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to discuss further.
Great. Okay, thank you, Mario. Those are all of our questions. And again, if you have any more questions, we've reached our time, so go ahead and email Mario. You can see his contact information right there on the screen. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, and have a great day.